Hello, welcome to the meeting tent. My name is Bill Haber, and we're going to continue our series in discussing the work of Stan Tenen. Before we start, I want to introduce our usual cast of characters: Levanah Tenen, Michael Andron, Daniel Gill, and joining us once again, Idelle Packer. Welcome again. So we've talked about, in past episodes, we've talked a lot about the book, The Alphabet That Changed the World. We've shown it, we've quoted from it, but I wanted to show you something that preceded the book. Stan was a huge priority was getting his work out there and in print. And so Stan and Levanah put together this binder and sent it out. I don't know how many of these you put together. It was a lot of work, obviously, and a lot of this material ended up in the book. Then, after the book was published in 2015, they put together another one, and this is material that's not in the book. Again, material that is maybe master's degree, especially if you look at some of the work on the Sefer Yetzirah that's in here. And again, they sent it out to those who were supporting and interested. And it's something that I'm sure everybody would like to have access to. And it brings up an important topic. In a previous episode, I talked about our desire and our need to produce the hand model, to manufacture it, put together a project, a business, and we are going to do that. But an even a higher priority is to get all this material, and there's tons of it, digitized and categorized so that we all have access to it. It's basically a Meru library that we can cross-reference, we can have immediate access to. We can't really go any further with this project until that is done, or at least in progress. To do that, Meru Foundation needs funding. Levanah is the Meru archivist, but she can't do it herself. She needs a staff of people who can help do this. So we're going to be asking for funding to get this project done. It's crucial, it's important, and I think having this will accelerate this knowledge in ways we can't even imagine. So we are going forward with the Meru library, let's call it that, so that we all have access to it. And while I was going through the latest binder, I found this draft that Stan had put together. 5 things I wish I had known from the start. And the second one is especially pertinent that I wanted to read to you. And this is written by Stan. I didn't realize that rote learning was fundamentally different from experiment and experience. There is a rabbinic teaching, Naseh v'nishma, that most people in our time do not fully appreciate. You only understand something after you experience it. The Hebrew words mean we will do and we will understand. It is deeply and fundamentally different to learn by experience and experiment than it is to learn by quoting and repeating and analyzing the experience of others. For many years, I did not understand why academic and rabbinic scholars in particular had a hard time understanding and appreciating what I was proposing. I didn't realize that communities of learning based on rote knowledge are often not even aware of how different their perspective is from communities of learning based on experiment and personal experience. And that's kind of the fundamental of the research. It makes me kind of wonder if Stan had known that at the beginning, how things would have been any different. Maybe it's better that he didn't know that. In any case, I think this is a topic of huge importance and probably the underlying principle of what we're doing here. Because the three of you, Michael, Idelle, and Daniel, your work is based on this principle of doing, of experimenting, of not adhering specifically to rote learning and getting it out there. And we're going to get into a subject in a few minutes based on a poster. But before we do that, I'd like to ask the three of you to comment on this, because I know that it's part of what you're doing. And I think, Daniel, you had a comment to make about this.
Yeah, I think Stan was very much ahead of his time, and in his clear idea about learning and experiential learning, he's right in tune with kind of the latest trends in education. I just finished a master's degree in a program at Vermont College of Fine Arts that was based on that centers around projects, and it's really a project-based learning system. And so you learn by doing and by this writing. And so I did some research on it, and it turns out that actually there is no comparison. Actually, people who learn experientially do better on standardized tests, on the regular testing, students. And they also show, and this is a study was recently done, I think by Edutopia, which is George Lucas's foundation. They did a study, or they were partially funded a study somewhere out there on the West Coast that showed that not only do the people who learn experientially do as well, or actually they do better on testing, but they actually learn deeper. They have a deeper understanding of the material that tends to stay with them over time. And I would just add to that with a deeper understanding comes more valuable contributions to any field. If you learn something by rote versus experientially, you're going to have a deeper contribution if you learn by experience. Anyway, so that's a little bit what I found. But
yeah, I just want to interject. It made me think about the Judaism that I grew up with and my generation. It was all rote learning, and it's probably the main reason why most of us rejected it at some point and went into or got involved in some of the Eastern philosophies, which was more experiential. And then finding out that there was a branch of Judaism called Kabbalah that actually did tie that in. We were never taught that growing up. Idelle, you as a choreography worked with people who weren't Jewish and learned the Hebrew letters, which was kind of interesting.
Yes, many of them had no idea what the written language looked like. They knew the letters by the gestures only. And I remember they were kind of surprised at even seeing it on paper, like trying to see that's the letter that we've been doing in movement. Yeah, I mean, I know I'm a kinesthetic learner. So if the learning is all auditory and kind of rote learning, it's really, I have to just focus so hard and work so hard at it when it's presented more in project-based learning that Daniel was describing. My curiosity is just, so present. And so, yeah, I think I just want to tell a little anecdote about Stan, because it really shows that it was in his nature to be a kinesthetic learner and experiment. I was coming to visit for the first time to Levanah and Stan's home, and I wanted to bring a gift. And I had this little vase it was quite small, and it was in the shape of a pomegranate, and I had gotten it in Israel, and I thought that would be a beautiful thing to give, and it's small, it'll fit in my suitcase. And I brought that to Stan. And while we were talking, I would say for over an hour, that little piece of a vase was in his hand and he was twirling it, turning it upside down, turning it on its edge, seeing how it balanced. There it is. That was the gift. And he never stopped moving this thing, but he was talking about other things. So it was kind of like fiddling. And I could just imagine anything that came his way that he wanted to see what it was like upside down, inside out, twirled. What happens if, if it's bare, where is the balance point? It was really a remarkable observation. And I think that's why this mind of his can create and the book takes us through his journey of so many ways to look at a given problem and his persistence, because that was just the way he solved problems. It's very similar to dance. I mean, we're trying to translate an idea into movement. We do movement research. We try to figure out what fits and what doesn't fit, and just changing the perspective of seeing the dance from the front and changing it to an audience in the round is just like turning that little vase, because all of a sudden I saw that that was how it had to be and it was more meaningful. But again, it's getting in there and sweating it out a little bit before you know what is meaningful. And he just persisted until these concepts and patterns became meaningful. So it's a very similar creative process. Yeah.
What was in his hands and what was in his mind were completely related. And even from childhood, I will say that he was a hands-on learner. He was always behind me is a whole universe of tools. And if you watch his videos, particularly the earlier ones, all of the little models are things that he built with his hands. And those are the ones that he decided to show people. I have trunks of models that were not good enough. The first try, the second try, the fifth try, let's do something else. And your insight about Stan is completely correct. That is how he learned to manipulate not just physical objects, but what he was visualizing in his mind as well.
It's interesting, Idelle, that instinctively you just knew that was the right gift for Stan. I mean, not even having met him. Yeah. So Michael, you are steeped in Jewish knowledge and still practice the tradition. But somehow you were able to incorporate other philosophies, Eastern, and also the idea of moving energy, which is not common in Jewish liturgy, at least as it's practiced today. There are elements of it. So how do you incorporate, or how do you, what is your take on this statement that Stan made?
I could not agree more with the statement. I think that's a flaw in current modes of Jewish education, which are making some of the transitions that Dan talked about as well. There's an old Zen saying, when pointing at the moon, don't confuse the finger with the moon. In much of the Orthodox world, we're so busy looking at the details of the finger that we forget there's a moon there sometimes at all. And in the non-Orthodox world, we're saying, wow, look at the moon. Let's spread the light. And we have no way of getting there because we don't have the practice of, in our paradigms, the audio, the video, the kinesthetic, the visual, the kinesthetic. It's funny, as I'm looking at the five of us on screen, I have Levanah and you, Bill, on either side, and then this triangle in the middle. with a person who's a composer, musician, a person who's a dancer, and a person who's working energy in visual terms. It's like we're all of these, but clearly, him turning and feeling it with that pomegranate was simultaneously going on in his head, and probably hearing the music of the spheres at the same time. And we just pick it up different ways. The one thing that I would add on to the Na'aseh Nishma idea, I do believe we need to do it first. We need to physically feel something, and then we can try and absorb the understanding of it. But it's not a circle, it's a spiral. And once we do something, for example, we'll listen to a piece of music or watch a piece of choreography, and we have that experience of seeing it or hearing it. And then we listen to someone who explains, this is what you're looking at, this is what you're hearing. And we add to that, and then we try and experience it again. We don't hear it the same way we heard it the first time or did it the first time. It now has grown a little bit, which hopefully, if it's something that should be in our toolkit, we then think more about it and learn more about it, and just keep going in a spiral, trying to get closer and closer to something that's not visual and not audio and not kinesthetic, but is just part of our soul in whatever way that is. And so I agree that it's a problem, and I trust me, I know very well that feeling when he would go, as you pointed out, to certain areas and try and explain something that to him was simple, at least once he got it. And these people would look at him like, you're out of your mind. What are you talking about? How could you possibly jump from here to there? But he wasn't a 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of guy. He was an A, 2, Gimel, Delta kind of guy. He would go around and take from all of these places and see the singularity and the universal nature of these things. And that strikes me. So that would be my reaction. And the selection of people in our groups here is great, because I might totally miss something looking at it, but then hearing Dan from his world and his consciousness and Idelle from hers suddenly enriches all of us. Each one enriches all of us and moves us along that spiral path.
Right, got it. Yes, Levanah.
What I would add to, Michael's description of his perception of how Stan thought, I always thought of him as what I would call a splot thinker. These posters that we're going through, again, he would do many iterations of a particular poster because that was his notebook. And what he was able to do in terms of seeing all of these threads from many, many, many different fields that to most of us seem quite disparate. He called himself a pattern recognizer, but I think more accurate from my point of view to say would be he was a process recognizer. He could see how similar processes in different fields, how some basic processes that they were operating at or looking at were actually congruent. And so to him, the relationship between studying the physical qualities of the universe and studying the spiritual qualities of the spiritual universe had a very intimate relationship, because he saw the same processes being at their foundation. At least that was my point of view and my conclusion as to how he could pull all of these bits of knowledge from not just different spiritual traditions, but from everything that he saw, including like this little pomegranate.
Levanah, is it fair to say that certainly he was a master of metaphor? He uses that word continuously throughout the book because he saw that each thing was a metaphor for the other, for different ones, and that was things equal to the same thing or equal to each other. So by him recognizing the bigger definition of one world, it was easier for him to connect with a different world, because the metaphor for this is that, and the metaphor for that is this, and 5 other things.
Actually, what I would say, almost like that, but instead of it, is that he recognized that each thing was a metaphor for the same higher thing. Not that they were metaphors for each other, but that in fact, the each others were a metaphor for some higher thing. Something that, particularly back in the early days of our work, where we were going for a very wide audience, which included people of, as he used to put it, all faith and no faith, is that ultimately, and we would run into flack from very observant people that we were trying to reach, saying, oh, you're trying to unify religions. No. The point of what I just said, I think, is that for each individual thread, identity, whatever, it's very important that they be themselves. They are not each other. And yet each points to that central thing in its own way. And that it's very important to be aware of the differences as much as you're aware of the similarities. And appreciate them and celebrate them, because everybody's different.
So let's take a look at a poster. So this is the poster. It's probably what we could term the Meru Masters program, because it is a little advanced. But I want to start with this. Now, it quotes from Ezekiel. You see where it says the Haftorah. Haftorah is part of the weekly, part of the Shabbos custom to, after the reading of the Torah, there is a corresponding, what's called a Haftorah, taken from the liturgy of the rest of the Bible. In this case, it's from Ezekiel. Okay, so this is our website, www.meruvideo.com. If you haven't had a chance to visit, you'll see a lot of our videos here. This is the program we're doing here, but this is something of particular interest. The video companions to Alphabet That Changed the World. This was done in 2018, 2019. I recorded Stan's voice. He was in no shape to appear on video, and then edited these videos to his voice. So I'm going to show the beginning of A Prayer for Peace. And I highly recommend watching these videos because it really supplements a lot of what we're talking about here.
The puzzle started with a prayer, a question, a thought that I had when first approaching the Kotel in August 1967, just after the Israelis had retaken Jerusalem. And what I saw was very happy Israelis celebrating, smiles on their faces, and very sullen Palestinians. And I had the thought immediately, these people don't like each other. They don't get along. if there's anything I can do to help make peace, let me know. It wasn't until I came up with the model that we're now using, the inverted T geometry, recognized that that's what Ezekiel was describing in Ezekiel 37 and Haftarah Vayigash, and that's where the quote comes from. That when we recover our language, we will have one unified nation, one unified language under one God, and that's when there'll be peace and security. This is Ezekiel's prophecy, telling me why all these years I stumbled on the alphabet. The alphabet was in front of me because I made that prayer. I was trying to find a way to make peace. I didn't know the alphabet was the key. But many years later, I finally read the Haftarah and realized that's what Ezekiel was saying. That by means we can discuss, we don't know what's really going to happen. It seems to me that this piece of the puzzle is a vital part of what it takes to make lasting peace and security for Israel, Eretz Israel, and the Torah. And so it could be fulfilled.
So what do you guys think about this idea of taking a biblical prophecy of Ezekiel, which who follows prophecy, I mean, and turning it into a geometric idea that he felt fulfilled his desire to make a connection leading to peace. And of course, at this point, he was talking about peace in the Middle East. I mean, who does that? And how does that happen? And how does that work?
Well, I can actually step in here. Maybe I should let other people speak first, but what actually happened, I mean, I can show you. This is that particular section of Ezekiel in Aryeh Kaplan Living Torah, which you can see all of the post-its on it, okay? Anyway, he was going through this after he had come to the geometric metaphor of the inverted T, which he did in about 2000 or so. And what he saw as he looked at each word individually, not necessarily how it was translated, but he went back and forth. He appreciated Kaplan's take on translation because it tended to open possibilities for him, just Kaplan's approach for people who know that particular translation. Anyway, and he said, wait a minute, 2 sticks. I've been working with 2 sticks. Is there a correspondence here? And there are other posters in this series where he starts corresponding the number of letters in a particular verse with the number of letters that he found in another place, etc., etc. I won't go into the details, but he worked on it and worked through it for a very long time. But the image of the various qualities which he had already developed of this inverted T or inverted T triangle model was in his head. And so he could look at text, which he always took seriously. Anything in the Tanakh, he had decided that he would take this seriously and see what happens many, many years before that. And that was his approach the whole way through. And he saw these correspondences, these potential correspondences, and he went through them and went through them and went through them. And this poster is a distillation of some of the results. So that was his process.
Let's take another look at this poster. And any of you feel free to jump in on this because it's got terms that I wasn't familiar with is the idea of Bnei Israel versus Beit Israel, the descendants of Israel and the house of Israel. Any thoughts on these ideas, or is this too advanced for us?
Yeah. It's difficult to talk about this poster because it's true, it does require somewhat of a familiarity with the vocabulary, not just the vocabulary that Stan used, but also just simple translation and analysis of certain Hebrew words. Like if you take a look at in the yellow section in the middle, you take a look at the red line, which he says Ephraim, fruit equals whole. Okay, in terms of the inverted T model, he he identifies the horizontal line as the earth plane. You know, basically the universe, the physical universe, the place where we live, and the vertical line as leading to the infinite transcendent. Going just back to that red line, why does it say Ephraim fruit whole underneath? Well, if you know Hebrew, you realize that there is a root in the middle of the name Ephraim, pri, which means fruit. And then there's a natural association of fruit with something that lives on the earth. And he identified that line, as I say, as the earth plane, nature, physics, the world. So with understanding that one word, you can kind of see why he wrote that one line.
You know, I have here, I'm sorry.
It is difficult.
Yeah, I have here some notes that are actually on the back of this poster. And let me read this. The inverted T model is illustrated in these posters is the geometry of Ezekiel. The stick of Judah unified with the stick of Ephraim in the hand. In this model, Ezekiel should not be understood as a magical prophet, but rather as a trained farmer or herdsman who knows his crop or his herds and knows the seasons and what signs precede what results. Thus, if what I'm proposing is valid, it must be one part of what is needed to bring peace and secure Israel for Jews, Judaism, and Torah. I'm suggesting that the stick, Eight's tree of Judah, is the vertical unit line, and the stick of Ephraim is the horizontal unit line. And then he goes into some quotes by Aryeh Kaplan to kind of exemplify his point here. And then when the Kabbalists speak of God's eminence and transcendence, they say that he fills all worlds and surrounds all worlds. This is from the Zohar. The letter Bet refers to the interface between these two concepts, and hence the name of the letter Bet is related to the word Bayit, meaning house. So that goes back to the very beginning of his research, seeing Beit, the first letter of Genesis, as the contrast between inside and outside, and that follows through with the ideas in this poster. You really, I think, to get Stan's work, you have to keep in mind that concept constantly. That the reciprocal, the complementary yet opposing concepts of inside and outside. And in the book, he goes through that many times.
Yeah, it occurs to me also there, you know, this is a very, this conflict between Joseph and Judah, or Yosef and Yehuda, is one that's from the very beginning of our history, actually. In Genesis, there's a conflict between Joseph and Judah, and Vayigash elav Yehuda, and Judah approached Joseph when at the beginning of this very parsha. So this parsha in the Torah, it deals directly with the conflict between Judah and Joseph, and that has a tremendous bearing on Jewish history, because as we know, the Jewish kingdom was split into two, and there was war between them, and it was not a good scene. And so Ezekiel's prophecy comes out of trying to heal this rift within the Jewish people. What's so fascinating about what Stan is saying here, on many levels, is in kind of a deeper, like underneath level, like he's pointing out, our external problems are because of an internal conflict. And when we get the internal conflict resolved, the external problems will also be resolved. And that's precisely what this is. You have these two forces within Judaism. One is much larger, it's actually, in a sense, the amount of, quote, secular Jews, or Jews who are really into the world and want to explore the world, is much more than the Jews who are kind of, so to speak, looking towards God and towards religion and the religious world. But there really is still this very deep internal conflict amongst our people, and it seems to be, especially in Israel. I'm saying this is so prescient what he's got here. There is this deep divide. There's, you are either or, and there are some people like myself and others who try to kind of bridge that gap, or try to combine worlds. And it seems to me that what Stan has found here is such a beautiful bridge. I mean, the hand model is directly related to this, and the whole entire concept of the work of Meru is directly related to this in terms of Hashem Elohim, right? A son Nashil is Hashem Elohim, and the hand model is uniting these two things. And to me, it's extraordinary. And I think oftentimes prophecy, and this is, I think, why people avoid prophecy and prophets, is it's too real and it's scary. And so, the world still is, it's hard for much of the world to deal with the prophets that explain that, well, yes, the Jews will eventually come back to Israel. And then we did, and it's scary. We don't yet know how to deal with that thing without either jumping to one side or the other. So what's beautiful about Stan's work is it unites these two worlds, and it's really almost prophetic, what you have here on this page, and it incorporates so much history, but it also incorporates a history of the language and the development of Hebrew and development of modern Hebrew. One of the first things the Israelis, or the settlers in Israel, of modern Israel, although to point out there have been Jews living there for thousands of years, but the modern state of Israel, one of the first things they did was kind of reestablish these gateways, the Hebrew language and the roots. And they kind of re-examined both rabbinic and spoken language and tried to revive it. And they indeed have revived Hebrew as a language. And then at the very same time, you have a renewal of people really having deep spiritual experiences in the land, and kind of forgetting about a lot of the practical things and delving deeply into the experiential, or the kind of focusing on God as one. And so it's just astounding when you look at this in the context of ancient, like not so ancient, and then modern Jewish history. I mean, this page encompasses all of it. And then when you start looking at some of the mathematics, and you start looking at what he's doing here, I think it points very, very strongly to the future, in terms of generating a type of scholar that can truly combine both the secular and the spiritual, both of these things. So it's like a template almost for a new kind of scholar that really can encompass all of these things, which I think Stan was perhaps one of the first real people to try to attempt to do that. Anyway,
let me point out what I didn't before, what can be considered the bottom line, because it's at the bottom right here. Are you seeing this? The stick of Judah is united with the stick of Ephraim. He kind of color codes it to the poster, to become one in the hand, and one nation with one language in the land. So it comes back to the hand model, and the idea of generating hand gestures that are universal, because this does not only apply to Israel and the Jews. It goes much farther beyond that. And so that is really the essence of almost all of Stan's work, and ties into his prayer for peace at the Kotel in 1967. And by the way, it was almost a year to the day when he discovered that pattern in the first verse of Genesis in 1968. And so the prayer led to somehow opening up that Chumash that he had buried in his closet that he had received at his bar mitzvah, opening it up and seeing a pattern in the first verse. That was the answer to the beginning of the answer to that prayer that he made at the wall. Michael, do you have any comments on this?
The expanse of the vision is, to each person, it's going to be different. It's going to, whatever they can fit into their awareness. The primary image of the inverted T and the unity of the two is what it's all about, is elevating, opening a spiritual eye or a scientific eye, seeing a picture and then bringing it down with a desire not just to have been entertained by that vision, but to see it come together, and see, the scientist and the spirit guy getting together to see. Rav Kook, who was the first chief rabbi in what was then Palestine back in the 30s, was truly an inspirational choice, because he was somebody who could talk to the secular and he could talk to the religious. And it wasn't always completely peaceful, but he was one of the very few people who could do that. And it's a problem that we face today as Israel becomes alive again, as the language becomes a spoken language again, that we have to try and expand our own. How big can we make our vision to create the unity that Ezekiel was doing? I mean, Ephraim, and Ephraim, as you said, means fruitful, has the word pre in it, was 10 of the tribes. And then Judah and Israel sort of represented the end. One was different size than the other. And if you just imagine all of them coming together, what is it, a caduceus, where they have all the sticks together and bound together to create that unity. It's inspiring, and hopefully would inspire. Just I can see Idelle's dancers, each one representing one of the tribes and doing a unity thing together. And certainly music has that. Whatever your vision is, come to the same place, no matter what side you're coming from. It's not a T, it's a circle with a stick in the middle. Can we all come together and form that circle?
It's an interesting image, yeah.
And that's the miracle of it. And we talked about the word, I think, in the past, but I know we were talking about it the other day, that the word Knesset, and I don't mean by that the Israeli parliament, which is not always a picture of togetherness, but Nace is in the middle, miracle. That miracle is in the middle. And if each hand comes in with their own hand from the Taf world, the Taf at the end of the word Knesset, you really have an assembly. And we're assembling this. I mean, you can assemble it with a tinker toy, to make that image. But it's a fantastic image that all the different hands, the cuff, the palm, all the different palms coming at a circle like a maypole, and dancing around in one assembly is a beautiful vision. And he has just, blended it all in a page that I still find very confusing.
Right.
And I don't get all of it.
Right.
Okay, but the pieces that I get seem to point me in that direction, to that hopeful vision that will come in our day. Kenya
Yeah.
Hiratson.
Hiratson. Yeah, and I just want to tell people watching that you can't expect to look at these posters. Nobody expects anybody to get it, but it's really where instinct, kind of falls into place here, and we were lucky that Stan was so visual, and able to describe his visions, and get into Photoshop and do the color coding, and all his posters are like this. And you really have to look at them, carefully and see where all these connections are made. And he used color to do that. And again, if we get it animated, it would make more sense. But I think as we pick away at this, and we're going to look at other posters in future episodes, I promise you the next ones we look at won't be this complicated. We'll try to go to a little bit easier to take. Idelle?
Yeah, I think it's really important to remember what was said earlier by Levanah. These were his notes. And just having that explanation of the root inside Ephraim helped me understand a little bit more. But if I'm writing notes, I don't write everything that I know. I just write a few key words that will bring me back to what I had figured out. And that's what's so amazing is I look at the posters and I go, well, this math is a little beyond me. Can I sit with it a little longer? And there's usually something on the poster that is more simple. And if you look at this poster, the bottom left is the inverted T, where it's the most simple way for me to drop in. The up is extension in my own spine, and Elohim is the expansion. And I just sit with that. I start to breathe. I've embodied a sense that if I expand so greatly, I'm going to lose a little bit of up. I'm going to sort of curve over. My back is getting so round. But if I go up and I go up too much, I kind of narrow my back. So where can I bring my body into balance where the up is easy and the expansion is full of breath? And I can relate in my own body the most basic concept of this infinite up and this infinite expansion, that the one and the many are the same and are in balance. It is one totality. And then from there, I say, okay, now what am I going to do with that next image that might be a little more difficult? And just stay with the breath and stay with the lengthening and the widening, and you start to pick up more. And it will need explanation. We need Levanah to say, yes, this is how he was thinking. This is really where it came from. And the more I study Torah, the more I see the metaphors of the language of Torah, the language of text is within these models. And that's very exciting. And again, it's like do and you will understand. I was drawn to the actual spatial directions of the Sephirot. So I put it on the floor. And I had 10 dancers. Each dancer stood in a spot of the Sephirot. And then we walked away from it. We came back to it. It became this meditation. And it was all of us creating the concept that we didn't even understand. It was in the doing that the beauty of the meditation came out. It was the music. Suddenly we realized there's something bigger here. And so it intrigued me to study more. Yeah, so I just see a wealth of knowledge in what these posters show, but I don't expect myself to understand it all, at least
Of
not
course.
at first
Yeah.
glance.
I don't think any of us can.
Yeah, just pick out something that starts to have meaning, and then we can spread our understanding a little further. And I think I was rereading his book today, actually, in preparation for our gathering, and I just saw again and again that the concepts are there, and we just need to reread them and see how they fit into the diagrams. The diagrams were his notes, and he shared them with us, but there's going to be some mystery until the details are revealed.
This falls into kind of what we discussed last week in terms of the posters and, different segments of the posters telling stories in themselves. And this one certainly does that. We started with a difficult one today. Like I said, we're going to ease up on it a little bit. I think next time we'll go through it, and also we do have Stan discussing these posters also, and so that'll be a good way to start. I think that's the direction we want to go now in terms of discussing Stan's work and really getting into. I think today was a challenge for us, and really made us, really think hard in terms of all of our experience and apply it. And that's what we want to see going forward. But we have gone a long time today. Just goes like that, doesn't it? And so we will be back next time. And thank you for joining us. And we'll see you next time. Take care.